Hi there, welcome back. We're reading Hollow Kingdom. This is chapter 24. ST, staring blankly at a bald eagle, Seattle, Washington, USA. I refused to leave Dennis, setting aside the utterly absurd prospect of mounting a bird of prey. But Cry had a way with normalizing insanity. For example, by calmly convincing you to abandon your best friend and cavort with a deadly raptor. He assigned an intimidating mass of crows to station themselves silently among the limbs of the Norway maple, their sole job to keep one eye out for danger and the other on my bloodhound. Tippi Hedren would have peed herself. It was utter madness. But I did it. I clambered my way onto the back of a fucking bald eagle. Or rather, hobbled up there, as awkward as an elevator fart. With a tight chitter, she spread her powerful wings and lifted us into the air. The Norway maple below us rustled and shimmied as hundreds of crows shot from its branches. The crow's strange summoning song rose with us, softening and fading. The bald eagle's mighty flaps rose us higher, shrinking the grass, the Norway maple, and Ballard High School. I dug my feet into her back, feeling the muscle under her carpet of smooth down, the composed power of our flight. Her feathers felt silky and strong, their wispy plumes lifting to dance where the wind kissed them. This was her destiny, to ride the wind. She was airborne. Pride fizzed inside me. To be feathered, I thought, as the eagle owned the sky, gravity tipping its cap, is to eschew captivity, to taste the pulpy fruit of freedom. Oh, how I had missed it. Gliding smoothly out the ride, she flapped half as much as the crows, slicing through the air as if it were whipped frosting. Her fleece-white head jerked mechanically in front of me as she used these keen yellow eyes to navigate, monitoring the Lego pieces of Seattle below. I didn't say anything to her because I felt awkward as hell. I mean, what would you say? Have you done this before? Am I your first crow? No. If Big Jim had taught me anything about talking to females, it was that sometimes you can save yourself by shutting your Cheeto hole. The fluff-puff sparrow sped along beside us among the black wings, with rapid wing flaps, a bullet of a songbird. My body buzzed with exhilaration, with being the badass crow on the back of a bald eagle, with just being. Trees were broccoli, roofs were playing cards, roads were ribbons, and hills were mole mounds. A muddied cluster of army trucks and tanks looked like the olive-green G.I. Joe toys of young mofos. The world seemed more manageable again, as I'd known it to be when I could fly. Flanking us were hundreds of crows, now silent but for the whooshing of their onyx wings. Then, curiously, I realized that it wasn't just crows around us. Clenching my feet tighter, I stole a glance behind me, almost losing my grip in shock. My eyes were met with an avian horde that was on our tail, an immense flock of crows, but also the white and black bands of Canada geese. They were song sparrows and house finches, frantically flapping mallards and great blue herons, the sky's RVs. The bright yellow blips were American goldfinches shouldered by dark-eyed juncos, pine siskins, bush tits, robins, wrens, and nuthatches. Flickers and jays and swallows and towhees, parakeets and starlings, flycatchers and vireos. A cast of red-tailed hawks hovered above, dangerously near their prey, but everyone focused on flight alone, as if we were one airborne entity. That's when the nerves got me, snatching my legs with pulsing shakes. Here we were, all flying side by side, elbowing out the clouds, all led by me and the bald eagle I was riding. I was the ringmaster. No one made a sound, not a single cheep or chirrup. My insides quivered like microwave pudding. Shit turd! I startled at hearing my full name, ducking before darting my head in search mode. You're alive, came the voice. I shook in the gunmetal gray body, the determined flapping that brought it alongside the eagle. I shook my head in disbelief upon seeing those pale custard yellow eyes, still playful and lit with wisdom, and a tail as flaming red as cayenne pepper. It was Gubari. Is it really you? I asked the volitant parrot, scared to face another disappointment, another taunting ghost from my old life. A heart can take only so many dangling carrots. "'Tis I," he squawked. "Didn't think you'd make it out alive. You appear to have hijacked an eagle, too. Bit of a change from Big Jim's shoulder, but very intrepid. Good for you." Big Jim! What a burst of joy to hear his name spoken, stoking the glowing embers of his memory. I tried to remember the last time I'd seen Gubari and his mofo, Rohan. It must have been at Wings of the World, the exotic bird store at Bothell, because that was always where we saw one another. But the times all blended together. Big Jim and Rohan always exchanged tiny talk, finding an infrequent oasis of common ground amidst a sea of differed opinions. I would jabber with Gubari, one of the only birds I would associate with because of his sharp intellect and deep insight into the world of the mofos. The African Grey could speak English, so many more words than I could. He could do impressions and count and be funny and entertain a crowd with his clever tricks. He was a brilliant being, a straddler of worlds. "Why are you piggybacking on a bald ego?" he asked, as one might. "I think I wanted to be a mofo so much that I wished away my wing." "I see. You're grounded?" "Yes." "Permanent?" he asked. "Who knows?" And that's all we said about that. Creatures of the animal kingdom don't dwell on disability. They accept and carry on. "Tell me, Gubari, where's Rohan?" I asked, frightened of an answer. Gubari, his flight like glitter dropping from an envelope, lowered his custard eyes to a mass of sick mofos scurrying below like ants around spilled Kool-Aid. He clicked his tongue and whistled. I listened in rapture to this old-world bird who held cities in his mind, whole history books deep in his belly. Hold on to your heart as I tell you this, St. Nira got sick. Rohan told her to stay at home because her symptoms seemed odd. She rained with sweat and her hands were swollen, fingerprints distorted, twice the size they normally were. But our matriarch insisted she was fine. Of course, the time-old lesson, she should have hung back, abandoned her fighting impulse. But Nira had fought her whole life and knew nothing else. It got worse while she was teaching that day, and red and blue flashing lights took her to the hospital. Rohan and I raced there to be at her side. It was chaos. Armed guards seized the sick and were quarantining them in plastic bubbles and holding cells. There were needles and tasers. People screamed about conspiracies and the reckoning. Some had grayish skin. One was cannibalizing his own foot right there in the hospital lobby. I tell you, priests in penguin colors were called in, but most ran away screaming. There was a young child, a brown-eyed girl, whose skin was sloughing off her. Her tears couldn't stop it. I saw a man whose head was swollen, features bulbous and shiny, his jaw twice the size of a normal man. Then 2 armed men in yellow suits and masks snatched Nira. She started to scream, a sort of primal keening. It didn't sound like our Nira. Nira had always sounded like the May rains, spring's lullaby. Rohan ran to her. A guard brought his club down on Rohan's temple. Here Gubari paused to pluck Rohan's voice from the sky. He mimicked him perfectly, yelling, "Leave her alone, I beg you." He transported me back in time to the horrors of a hospital lobby, watching Rohan plead with a soldier, begging, desperate, as raw as a fresh wound. I pecked and scratched at the guard's face, pinning him into a corner, holding him as best I could with my claws. The other tried to tranquilize Nira. She tipped his arm clean out of a socket. I no longer knew her. Nira, custodian of Rohan's heart, our brilliant professor of gender studies, our genteel, soft-spoken sage. Then, and I tell you, shit-turd, I've seen some things in my day, but Rohan and I could do nothing, as if we were stripped of our minds, feathers and fingers, as we watched Nira change. "Change?" I asked, thinking of Big Jim, his rogue eyeball and endlessly swiping digits. Nira started secreting something from her skin, different from the sweat, something sticky. And St. right then and there, she climbed up the hospital's inside, scaling drywall. She just hung there, silent, stuck in the middle of the lobby wall, watching us. For a few moments she didn't move, But I knew that would change. I could feel something coming, something so dark it couldn't be named. I screeched and panicked because I could feel that she had gone, St. But Rohan's love was so big, he couldn't leave her. His heart was fused to the wall with her. I shot up and perched on an air vent and watched the descent in terror. The descent? There was a degradation. They all changed, or they were devoured by the changed ones. I saw a newly hatched human, fresh from the egg, and I tell you, it had ridgets on its skin and thin jutting limbs, and it was scuttling around the hospital like a bleeding spider. Not yet a day in the world, and it was hunting. Rohan was taken as he tried to rip Nira from the wall. The human with the monstrous jaw brought his teeth down onto Rohan's neck. There was nothing I could do, nothing but to fly away before what Nira had turned into made it up the wall to where I was perched. I took Rohan's Kanthi mala from around his neck when the changed ones were distracted. I flew back to our home to bury the necklace, to pay respects to their memory. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, was the only thing I could think to say. Gubari must have carried the same weight I did, hard on the wings. He asked me about Big Jim. I nodded and swallowed because that's all I could manage. But Dennis is alive, I told him. Dennis! Well, 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 the golden nose. That is cheery news. A bit of sparkle from the old world. My heart thumped like the hind legs of a rabbit. Gubari was a therapy bird, permitted to go everywhere as a celebrated member of Mofo Society. He was a treasure trove of knowledge, an idol of my past, and now my much altered present. And he was here for me to ask the questions I could of no one else. Gubari, what happened to them? I pointed my beak at the humpback broken mofos that dotted the land between tree crowns and the hats of buildings streaming beneath us. Ghostly shadows of the wondrous creators they had once been. Gubari's tone remained as steady and stoic as the Cascade Mountains. It was a virus. Like an infection? A disease like the dreaded bird flu? I asked, hesitating to bring up such a skin sore for our kind. No, not like AIDS or Zika or Ebola. That was man's creation. This came from the internet, through the screens. St. This came from the connectivity. I don't understand. Well, I don't have all the answers, and in any case, they're not mine to give, but I know it started with the addiction. Technology was an intangible seductress, a siren calling for ships to meet her jagged rocks. It was a virus that spread through the systems, through the network, chips, watches, phones, tablets, through eyes, skin, and synapses. Rohan had seen it coming. He burned everything connected long before the first warnings were sent out. The wireless emergency alerts. We lived for a time in the dark. Choppers doused the city in their lights and blasted taped instructions. Trucks passed outside with loudspeakers and panic. And later, when the planes fell from the sky and the cars collided, a few men with farmland and big hearts yelled their warnings from horseback. Women with swollen bellies headed for safety underground, burrowing like rabbits. But the World Wide Web had humans tangled in its threads. Seattle became a mecca of explosions and screaming and hunger that could never be satisfied. Then the change, that virus, caused them to have physical morphine. Now it seems that it has made them voracious. They are constantly hunting for the internet, electricity, power, screens, I answered, staring down at mofos teeming over a billboard, clamoring to cover every inch of it with their twisted bodies. Through gaps in their flailing limbs, I could make out its message. It said, "Will the last person leaving Seattle turn out the lights?" It made more sense to me now. After what happened with Tiffany S., the black tide began to drown Big Jim. He hid at home with his bloodhound and his crow as the world fell apart. He had no more fight left inside to fight what was outside. I'd been in denial about all of it, about the condition of Big Jim's heart and the terrible things happening in the world around us. There's something more to it, St., though I can't yet say what it is. Something greater is at play here. In time it will reveal itself. I shuddered. We have lost the very best part of our world, I told Gubari. Gubari laughed, a laugh to split open a star. Change is inevitable, dear crow. We must adapt. You cannot stop the tide, St. You must be more like the log that bobs along its surface. My life is not everything is a tide. In and out, in and out. Even your humans. We have every advantage to us in this new world, harnessing the power and knowledge of the old one. A fresh start is sometimes just the ticket. We must recognize that our greatest gifts sometimes come in the ugliest of shells. He sounded like Rohan with his butterscotch cadence, his buoyant wisdom. But it will never be the same. It will never be as good. We are losing the mofo touch. We will lose the most magical essence of them. Creativity. To create is the greatest gift of a mofo. Below, the brambles writhed like a great black dragon, a breathing creature of thorn and spine. We flew over a seaplane that had plummeted from the sky and collided with an apartment building, severing its neck. Even in utter devastation, wounded brick and shattered glass, the ingenious development and dreams of the mofos were scintillatingly beautiful. Gubari laughed again, the frothy laughter of a bird who has lived many lifetimes, a bird who weathered worldly change like seasonal malt. Take a good look around you. In a teaspoon of soil, there are more organisms than there were people on this planet. Creativity swims freely all around us, and beauty is everywhere. Look! He gestured below to a herd of dogs, a gargantuan canine patchwork quilt, billowing through the streets in a splendid blur of browns, silvers, ebony, and snow, big and small, running as one against the change. Cattle dogs, collies, shepherds, pointers, dogs with survival in their sinew. They were painting the earth with their success, parading their freedom in a way only the once enslaved can. Don't shackle yourself to an ideal. Always go with the tide. Listen for guidance. Creativity is not a uniquely human trait. Creativity is everywhere, in the barb of every feather and each audacious sapling. To err is what's human. To what? To err. Humans marked their distinction with their mistakes. A creature can be heartbreakingly powerful and loving while also being a destroyer of worlds. You are mistaken in thinking they're the only rational animals. What you are looking at is just a chapter in their story, one they narrated. Perhaps, he paused as we soared over the silent bodies of two apartment complexes that had collapsed into one another, their guts glistening in gray. Perhaps there is still a whole book for us, many chapters ahead. You must evolve. Float with the tide. Trust that she knows what she is doing. We must listen to her through aura, echo, and web. Oneida has spoken. If you think so much of aura, how come you never spoke of it before? Shit turd, the last time I saw you, you wouldn't associate with other birds or be called a crow. Things change every second. Embrace it and know that it's always for the best, he said with a wink. For now, we must listen to what's been on the voice of the wind and follow the lessons of who we have been summoned to see. Let us see what the one who keeps has to say. Gubari, I told him, as vulnerable as when my home was a rounded sweep of eggshell. I am the one who keeps. Gubari's lemony eyes filled with mirth as he let out a full belly laugh. His wings flapped harder in delight. Oneida's full of surprises and a killer sense of humor. Before I had a chance to digest the terror and uncertainty that pulled in my belly, the eagle started toward earth. She signaled her descent with a downturned head, lowering in a smooth figure of 8. Still in miniature, a caterpillar bulldozer and construction trailers slept on the sand mounds below. Tarp, brick, the skeletons of scaffolding, and orange cones that looked like candy corn from above all lay scattered. It was some sort of sports facility that the mofos had been working on, a half-finished track and baseball fields exposing their guts, and the snaking veins of electrical pipes spying from the sand surface. The crows must have chosen the spot, since construction sites are known meeting grounds for our kind. The crows appeared to have a lot of clout, and I liked it. We touched down onto the sand of the abandoned construction site with a careful landing, as if onto the top of a souffle. I wobbled off the magnificent raptor's back amid the deafening whooshing of wings as hundreds of birds descended, some perching on sleeping tractors and trucks, others dipping the webbing of their feet into the sand. The crows stood in the center, holding court, strutting proudly as only crows can with their casual, sauntering swagger. We were utterly surrounded. Plovers, kingfishers, ospreys, sapsuckers, larks, nightjars, shrikes, and buntings. I got starstruck at the sight of a snowy owl because, Harry Potter. I'd never seen these birds except for in pixel form, and here they were, shiny-eyed and ruffling their magnificence. Golden eagles and stellar sea eagles filled a crown with bodies so beautiful and majestic it was hard to look away from them. They kept their raptor glares on two mofos who were hunched and staggering along the side of the townhouse, their heads stooped and fixated on their empty palms. In their current state of absorption, they were harmless, but the giant birds kept watch, using eyes 8 times as powerful as a mofo's. So very little can escape an eagle eye. Birds of the shore, the airborne voices of echo, birds of the forest, even birds of the tropics, like the tanagers and the marmalade-beaked toucan, presumably zoo renegades. There were migrators and nesters, pillagers, thieves, nurturers, and sages. Bones, splintering talons, bright bursts of color, and camouflage quills. Urban birds and forest dwellers, sun-loving birds and those who zigzag the sky in the dead of night. Most had nothing in common, their only connection through aura. They were all here for me, the one who keeps. What did that even mean? How did I get myself into this mess? I had none of Gubari's certainty, as I realized, a sobering realization that felt like a bellyful of ants, that they had made a mistake. Just as the one who opens doors hadn't been a savior, I was not who everyone thought I was. It just wasn't possible. I was a silly bird with an identity crisis and a moderate to severe Cheeto addiction. And it was all going to be exposed right here under the unblinking eyes of 1,000 feathers. I swallowed hard so as not to projectile yarf. That's only acceptable for vultures. A single crow rattled. Otherwise, there was just uncanny silence. Cry, his chest shimmering black and purple, addressed the crowd. Sentinels of the sky, we here, all of us, are the overseers. The eyes in the clouds. We have talked of this gathering for some time. We know the unbroken are coming, baring their teeth with an unparalleled hunger. We know they are encroaching and claiming our territory, snatching our bodies in their mouths and swallowing our eggs. But this is our land, and so a great war has begun. We must remember the words of Oneida, passed on to us by the groan of a great oak. When the grass fights the concrete, she shall usher in a new era. The domestics are dying. We have been called upon to help them, and in turn they will rise against the unbroken, driving them back to the mountains. We will claim the territories for ourselves. Access will be granted to the food in the hollow homes, the shelters, the materials to build strong nests and fortify our own. Since the hollows are vanishing, what was theirs is now ours. Oneida said that the one who keeps will lead the way, and now finally, Sky Sentinels, the one who keeps is among us, and our time has come. I know it in the part of me the butterflies speak to, the part that is tugged by the stars. We must act quickly, because every minute they draw nearer. It is known. This, he stepped aside way too dramatically, thrusting his damned perfect beak toward my noggin, is the one who keeps. Hundreds of bird eyes, keen eyes that could spot a baby field mouse from the clouds and read the diaphanous dance of ultraviolet light, burned into me. He is going to teach us how to touch through the glass so that we may claim the homes of the hollows and defend ourselves against the unbroken. Oneida has spoken. A chicken lost its composure and clucked. They all waited for my sage counsel. My heart raced, the pressure unbearable. I opened my beak and nothing came out. I tried to say something, and a sort of "hee" came out that sounded like a dying blow-up doll. Luckily, someone's question filled the air before I passed out. Excuse me, but wait, Are all the domestics our allies? Came a frail voice from a bush tit whose name roughly translates as Gary. During this war, they are all our allies. We will work together, said Cry. Not cats, though, right? Asked a yellow-breasted western meadowlark. Cry gave his measured answer. Not every cat is bad. Mutters of disbelief rose like bubbles. Gary the bush tit, shifting his balance, lifted up his sad twig of a leg stump as a silent rebuttal. You're right, Gary. Cats can't be trusted, but everything else. But here came the stentorian cries of a northern goshawk, urgent beeps of an alarm. We don't stand a chance against the one who spits and the one who conquers. I've watched their devastation. There was a collective gasp, several shrieks at the mere mention of those names. Great, I thought. The one who conquers, another predator I'd yet to meet. We will spread word through Aura and all will know of our war, said Cry. Crows live by the code of murder. What has worked for the few will work for the many. We are stronger in great numbers, and that will be our advantage, our only way to win. When we band together, we will be victorious. Birds of a feather, I squawked. All eyes shot my way, regarding me as if I was something that a gull regurgitated. Apparently, no one had heard that expression, so I was left standing there like a blue-footed booby, utterly lost in translation. I briefly contemplated sticking my head in the sand in solidarity for the ostriches not represented here. But no, I'd come this far. This was a chance for the domestics who deserved a shot at life in the New World, a chance for Dennis and me to do something good. Cry is right. We must free the domestics, I said, a shake in my throat as I addressed 1,000,000 feathers, a club I never felt welcome to. They deserve a chance at life in this new world as much as we do, and we can help one another. But I didn't really have to tell them about the value of every life. Those who burst from shell know that gladiators fight for our survival. A bird recognizes that every life that surpasses a first breath is a miracle. So, what are we waiting for? If we're in such a hurry, tell us, chirped a snow bunting, bobbing its head up and down. Well, I should start by, the first thing you need to do is, assuming there is no way to jimmy the window, I was struggling, floundering, how to explain all the variables of breaking glass. The glass breaking I'd done so far had been a cobbled blend of on-the-spot deduction and a few Hail Marys. How to translate the actions of a mofo, the cool reasoning, all of that to the feathers. A cockatoo, naked as the German Big Boobs calendar's October mofo, chimed in. Show us how you did it. I escaped through an air vent. Show us how you break the glass. The cockatoo's bumpy gray skin told a story of stress and anguish. She had overplucked, her body suffering the same fate as Tiffany S.'s eyebrows. And yet here she was, exposed to the elements, as vulnerable as it gets. Here she was, speaking up without armor or protection. It bolstered me. Show us, birds began to sing, screech, trill, and warble. I turned to Cry, and he nodded. A great stirring of the air signaled the bald eagle's landing by my side. She trilled that lovely scattering of elevated notes and lowered her back for me. I hopped on as a monster truck show's worth of birds watched in fascination. She lifted those archangel wings, and suddenly we were taking flight to the rhythm of 1,000 pinions whipping the air. The evening tasted green and clean. I leaned forward and whispered where we needed to go, the place that hadn't left my mind since we'd first been there, and probably never would. The tiny sparrow darted through a sky of birds and was suddenly hurtling alongside the eagle and me. Don't worry, he said in a jittery whisper. I believe in you. They were tiny words from a tiny bird, but perhaps sometimes all you need is a speck of encouragement, an acorn of belief. The sparrow perched in a stunning Sitka spruce that sat on familiar territory. The tree limbs filled up with blackbirds, and the bald eagle gently touched down on the grass with a brisk flapping of her wondrous wings. The air suffered a storm born of feathers. By the flogging wings of thousands of landing birds, I hopped to the grass, cool and damp on my feet. Darting my head, I searched for Cinnamon, the tiny ginger form I hadn't wanted to leave behind. But there was nothing left. Something had taken all of her. Perhaps the same something had ravaged the body of the African painted dog that lay nearby. its tissues stretched over the gleaming rib cage. And you couldn't hate it. You had nothing or no one to be angry at. Everybody had been a victim. Turkey vultures huddled around the carcass, admiring the pearlescent beauty of it. Cry dropped down in front of me, his head cocked. Black eyes peered at me from everywhere with weighted expectancy. The pressure bore down on my plumage. I looked up at the townhomes, and a spark of hope wrapped my insides. Eyes in yellows, blacks, browns, oranges burned into me. If I fucked this up, then what? Dennis and I wouldn't be long for this world. They'd catch up to us. We'd be tracked down and taken by a trio of brotherly stripes. I hopped over to the sparrow's former prison, vaulting to the planter box of decaying plants and demonstrating how I had wedged my beak into the crack in the window and pushed it open further. The sparrow hopped up and down, ecstatic in its bones, reliving this moment of release. But a cold murmuring bounced among the crows. Cackles ripped through the leaves. They were unimpressed. The window was already open, came a rattling heckle. I looked at Cry. His head was still cocked. He did not address the heckler, which pecked at my panic. What if I couldn't find the things I needed? They were doubting me. Worse still, I was doubting myself. How do you touch through the glass with no opening? Came a jeering voice from the leaves. I sidled up to Cry. I'm going to need a couple of things, I told him. He nodded, and I whispered them to him. With Cry's throaty rattle, 4 crows fluttered down to join him on the grass. Once they'd received instruction, they took flight, disappearing into the distance. The next minutes were tense. I could feel that I wasn't yet fully accepted by this murder. Wasn't even accepted as a crow yet. What would they do to me if I didn't deliver? A black-headed grosbeak, sensing the tension, broke into a warble. The song was his father's song, unrepeatable by any other living being. It was a song about kindness, a unique and casual caroling. It was soothing and leisurely, and all his to share with the hundreds of beings around him. Nearby, a female grosbeak cocked her head in rapt attention, and I wondered if this was the beginning of a new chapter for them. Whether on another page further along in the book, an egg would hatch with this very song in the lining of its shell. It made me wonder if Gubari was right, if maybe the most beautiful things were still all around us. The crows returned. Fluttering a foot from the ground, they released the items in their clutches: a black eyeshadow palette, a TV remote sans batteries, a lump of metal, a severed tailpipe. As my stomach sank, my heart rose into my throat. These aren't the right things. I can't break through glass with these objects. They're not what I asked for. As I expressed this, I realized how much I sounded like I was bowing out, like a TV evangelist whose paralyzed parishioner is refusing to walk again. This crow is a phony, honked a tundra swan. He sounds strange because he's an imposter. He is not the one who keeps. A Steller's jay puffed his chest and hopped toward me. I felt the bodies closing in, the sky falling down. Cry placed himself between me and the encroaching mass of birds, some of whom had talons designed for dismemberment. Suddenly, cool, booming laughter rained from above, lifting the heads of the masses. A gray silhouette was framed by clouds. An African gray opened its feet and released a cell phone that dropped onto the grass. He touched down gently. Gubari looked at me, his face bright and cheerful, full of a hope I thought had been long extinct in our world. He had saved me. Watch what I do closely, I told hundreds of eyes. This will all happen very fast. My pulse was quicker than the sparrow's as I hopped with the cell phone toward the townhouse window. It took an uncoordinated leap to hoist myself to the window's ledge. I took in a deep breath, making a small prayer to the gods of Samsung as I pushed my twiggy black foot onto the power button. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. This was do or die. Everything riding on the hopes of a charge, that at some point a mofo had plugged in the Samsung cell phone screen, surged into an electric glow. 2 mofos, listless and lumbering at the side of the townhouse, cracked their necks toward me, eyes radiating focus. 2 jaws dropped, expelling a blood-curdling, rage-powered roar. They broke into that twisted horror show run. Birds screamed from the crowns of trees, screeched as caws, shrieks, squeals. I had seconds to get it right. I grasped the cell phone in my jittering feet and lifted it, perched next to the window, on the splintery sill. The mofos clamored, running on all fours, heads elongated, too long to be a mofo. An animal's run, and then they were leaping into the air, careening toward me. I released the phone, barely missing the dislocated jaw of a sick mofo, as they shattered the glass window, breaking through. The impact shook me sideways, thrusting me onto the ground beside the window with a series of painful rolls. Breakthrough. Relieved, I finally inhaled. Alarm barks sounded from the bowels of the townhouse. "Help me," I cried, belatedly realizing that in opening the gates to the townhouse, I'd unleashed terror onto a mother dog who would now do everything she could to protect her dying babies. 5 red-tailed hawks swooped in through the jagged frame of the broken window, with tight screams, fearlessly mobbing the mofos. They screeched at the changed ones, who screeched back, more feral, wide-eyed, like desperate underground things. As the mofo holding the cell phone swiped at a mobbing hawk, another bird snatched the phone from its thick yellowed fingernails, darting back through the window. Team Hawk in tow. The mofos galloped after them like broken hyenas, howling at the sky. The cell phone started to sing a song, a stark contrast to the melodic ditty of a black-headed grosbeak. Its tinny call, the sound of violence, haunted us as it dissipated in the shadows of the townhouse of horrors. It was done. The glass had been touched through. I shook crystal shards from my feathers and sidled up to the window, waiting for signs of life within the building. Then I felt a presence behind me and spun around to my very worst waking nightmare. A waddle of Humboldt penguins, the zoo penguins, those ship-beaked spam gremlins, were inches from me. I braced myself, trying to snatch one of a million insults that swirled in my head. And then, right there in front of everyone, they bowed to me. One of them, with a sugary pink spill around its almond eye, doubled over and yarfed up a fishy mound of mostly digested paste. Minuscule bones and the odor of SeaWorld dumpster confirmed they were once sardines. It was an honor the likes of which I had never experienced. Like well-dressed butlers, they sidled away, beacons of manners and respect. Everything I'd thought about them, everything Big Jim had told me, had been utterly wrong. Penguins, it turns out, are pretty fucking delightful. Sensing movement, I spun toward the townhouse. A sliver of a dog slunk from the shadows. Surely once a bushy husky, she was now all hollow hip bones and hunger and the first stanza of decay. A tiny, sickly puppy with crusted eyes dangled from her jaw. Hundreds of birds watched in stunned silence as the husky stood on her shuddering hind legs, unable to make the jump to her freedom because she no longer had the strength. And here it was, my ultimate limitation, mocking me cruelly. I couldn't help her because I couldn't open the door. None of us, from hummingbird to barn owl, could turn the handles that we needed to help the domestics. And for this shortcoming, this lofty genetic hurdle, they would die. I had accomplished the goal I'd set out to achieve, to pass through glass, and I had delivered the information to a mass of powerful feathers, and still, here it was, the metallic taste of failure. We were so close, and being this close, we would now all watch her die. The sky erupted into an explosion of piccolo notes. The calling was urgent, high enough to touch where airplanes once soared, and we looked up to see more bald eagles descend, flapping their wings with an excitement that lit the air. My eagle, the one who'd carry me all this way, was last to touch her talons down onto the branch of a western hemlock. The eagles fixed their buttercup eyes onto 5 figures that had appeared below them, figures they had guided here. I stared at the largest of them, a beautiful hulk of flesh and bone, whose breaths were deep and healthy. His face was a map of time, moon-shaped and as soft as the finest leather. His hands had their heartbreakingly beautiful digits coiled around a lump of grass. He looked on at us, wearing a superb smirk and a wild knowing. Red hair hung like a shower of straw around his hominid body. A piece of burlap was draped across one of his shoulders like part of a shirt, and right then I knew that it had all been true, or I was real. There was magic still left in the world, quiet magic that wasn't as showy as the tricks of a cell phone or one of those headsets that you put on your eyes to transport you to another world. The eagles chittered with spine-tingling excitement as the hulking male pressed his beautiful knuckles into the grass, his bulky legs propelling him toward us. He walked with slow stoicism as if he owned the earth. I caught a glimpse of a tabby cat watching him from behind a tree stump, glowing green eyes fixed on him in reverence. Ladybugs and grasshopper paused their buzzy lives to admire the straw-haired giant. He passed me, and my skin broke into bumps as I took in his smell, a smell that was just as the opossum had described, like old smells, like old grass and leaves and things, like hay, kind of. His feet, with toes and wrinkles and dexterous digits, flattened against the concrete steps as he approached the door and lifted an anthropoid limb and its draping red hair up to the doorknob. His 4 red-haired family members watched silently, running fingers through the grass in time. His bewitching digits closed around the doorknob, and as hundreds of birds caged the air in their chests, he twisted. The door didn't move. His legs buckled. It was locked. No, 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 it can't be over. He swept his hand along the ground and effortlessly picked up a pale rock. Drawing back his magnificent arm, he aimed the rock at the closest window and released it, shattering the glass. I watched with open beak as he plunged first his gray fingers and then his whole arm into the window. A sudden pop, and then a metallic clack, the sound of freedom. The door was open. He'd unlocked it from the inside. The skeletal husky slunk from inside her prison, the puppy in her jaw sucking in its first fresh air, and the herbaceous bouquet of grass. 1,000 bird eyes looked on in reverence and utter awe. The husky's liberator had a triumphant look. He knew what his powers meant. Here was the answer to freeing the domestics, the secrets to touching through the glass. Here was the one who opens doors. An orangutan, a powerful ally who could turn the knobs to a future. When the grass fights the concrete, she shall usher in a new era. It was known. Here was how we would win the war of land. We pondered the implications in utter silence, except for the rhythmic masturbation of a nearby squirrel. Wow, that was a long one, but that was chapter 24. See you next time for chapter 25.